Hello everybody, it's Mr. Sean. I'm happy to be back on the farm. It's been a long time since I've been here. We are currently having our plant sale, so while we have a bit of downtime, I thought it would be a good idea to make a little video about some more wild edible plants. Now, the last one I made was on dandelion fritters, but here at the farm we have a lot more variety to what we can choose from. So we are going to be covering 3 different wild edible plants today. We are going to be using those wild edible plants to make a quiche. A quiche is basically a breakfast egg pie, so stick with us and we are going to start foraging our wild edible plants and then we're going to make our quiche. So to start us off, we have garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is a very tasty wild edible plant. Its leaves are heart-shaped to triangular shaped with rounded points at the bottom, and it has deep serrations along the edge of the leaf. The seed pods of garlic mustard are a little like green beans. They jet straight up, however, instead of hanging down from a vine, and they come right out of the stem. The flowers are small and white and grow in a little tuft at the very top of the plant. The seed pods, however, can be found throughout the length of the stem and grow alongside the leaves. The downside to garlic mustard is that it is an invasive species, so its seeds spread very quickly through the wind and through water, and it can end up taking over forested areas as well as meadow-like areas. And as we pan the camera around, you're gonna see it is all over the place in here. Garlic mustard spread across this part of the farm. In fact, if we were to go to other parts of the farm, you'd see it there too. It's pretty much all over the place. Now, because it is an invasive species, I don't really care about taking as many leaves from one plant as I feel comfortable with. Ordinarily, you do only want to take a few leaves from each plant. That way the plant can survive a whole lot easier and you'll be able to have more for the future and you won't have taken away from someone else's. But garlic mustard is everywhere and it's invasive, so pick away. Garlic mustard is a very nutritious source of wild food. It is high in vitamin A, C, E, and even has some vitamin B. It has potassium, calcium, magnesium, and even has omega-3 fatty acids. So if you're looking to supplement your diet with something from the wild, garlic mustard is a great way to get your vitamins and minerals. Its flavor is very much like garlic. It's a little spicy. It's a good leafy green to add to things like salads. You can dry it out and add it into tomato sauces. You could even wrap chicken with it. And I've also seen some recipes where you can make wraps out of it using the larger leaves. As summer goes on, the leaves are going to get bigger as the plant gets bigger, but they're also going to get more bitter. So if you're looking for something a little more palatable, early summer is the way to go, and the younger leaves are what you want to pick. So we're going to get to harvesting, and then we are going to move on to our next wild edible plant. So we've walked a little bit a ways. We are now down at the fallen tree trail, and we have stumbled across our next wild edible plant. In front of us, we have a wild onion. Wild onion grows in forested areas as well as more open grassy areas. It can grow in tight clusters with lots of little pearls at the very bottom, or it can grow in more singular stalks. The whole part of the wild onion is edible, the roots at the bottom as well as the stem and the leafy greens at the top. Today we are going to be using more of the root. When we get into the kitchen to do our cooking, we are going to cook it with a little bit of butter, soften it up before we add it into our quiche. It is a little more floral than your regular onions, so you might want to try it before you start putting it into a dish. So the main characteristic to look for when harvesting wild onions is their leaves and stem. Wild onions grow similar to a reed where the leaves break off from the stem in segments. It grows in a circle towards the very tip of the leaf. It will be hollow, almost like a chive. And the other thing you'll look for is after you've broken off that leaf, give it a smell. If it smells like onions, it is probably a wild onion. Now, you can harvest the whole thing, or if you just want the greens on top, you can take a pair of scissors or a knife and just cut off the top. But for our purposes today, we're going to be using mostly the root. So when you go to pull your wild onions, grab them towards the base and just give them a firm grab. And there we have them. Pearl onions grown right in the wild. In practically no time, we have an abundance of onions ready to go. Maybe took me all of 5-10 minutes to gather this many. So our next wild edible plant is the poor man's pepper. This is often referred to as a pepper grass as well. It typically grows in fields or along roadsides, but just like with our dandelions, as we said then, do not harvest your wild plants from roadsides or areas that might have been sprayed with pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers. You do not want to end up eating those. Peppergrass gets its name from the seed pods that grow round and a little flat and have a similar appearance to that of the seeds of a pepper. It also has a pepper-like taste. It's closest to a green bell pepper. Now, all of this plant is edible. The seed pods, the leaves, the stem. It grows from a main taproot, and it can be found in the early spring through midsummer. As it gets a lot more sunlight, if it's out in more open areas, it's going to start to turn yellow. So you're going to want to pick this as soon as possible. You may also find it along the edge of the woods, which is where I've found this one along our trail, so it's getting plenty of sun but doesn't get overly cooked. Now, for our purposes today, we're just going to be using the seed pods, but you can also eat the leaves. So to harvest this, we are just going to take our hand and we're going to run it up the stalk and collect those seeds. And that's what we're going to cook today. So our next step is, after we've gotten back from our foraging expedition, is to get our pie crusts ready. So before we get them in the oven, what we're going to do is take a fork and poke holes in the bottom of the pan. And this is going to help it to release air as it's cooking, which will keep it from puffing up and leaving big pockets of air while it's cooking. The other one. And because we're going to add an egg mixture into this as it's filling, we're going to want to cook these in the oven for a little bit before we add our filling. That way it cooks all the way through and we don't end up with a goopy mess underneath our quiche. So our oven is preheating to 375. I'm just going to put these in now. You don't have to. It'd probably be better to wait, but we have some stuff to do while we're waiting for those to get ready. And if they're in there as it's preheating, doesn't really matter because we are looking for those to get cooked over a longer period of time anyway. So now that we have our pie crusts in the oven, our next step is going to be washing all of our wild edibles. Even though we got them from an area that doesn't have pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers, you're still going to want to wash them off because they might have something on there that's a little unsavory that you don't really want to be eating. So we're going to start with our onions. Just going to gather these up, get the water going, and just give them a good scrubbing. Get all the dirt off, anything that might be on there, little bugs. Get them cleaned off. Something else to do is just remember, onions are like ogres, so they grow in layers. So you can just peel off that outer layer as you're washing them off. It's going to be less palatable because it's going to be a little harder. And it's what's covered in all that dirt. So it's a lot faster to clean them off that way. So the next thing we're going to do is clean off our poor man's pepper. I'm just going to remove some of the stems from these. As I was picking them, some of the stems came with the seeds. Now, the stem is edible, but for the sake of appearance and palatability, we are going to just use the seed pods. Just give it a quick pluck-a-rooney. All right, looking good. Let's give these a splash in the water. Shake them about. Make sure all that little stuff is washed off. Grab ourselves a little bowl. And just flip. There we are. Looking good. So give these a quick rinse. That's too much water. Get rid of some of the grasses that got in there with them. All right. And we will leave these to drain because they could use a little more time. They are big, flat, and leafy, so they're going to hold a lot of water in between them. So the next thing we're going to do is prepare some of our wild onions a little more. So we're just going to chop off the part of the onion between the white and the green. You might want a sharper knife and to redo that. Yeah. So the next thing we're going to want to do is to prepare our wild onions a little more. So we're going to take our knife on a cutting board and we are going to slice off the part of the plant between the white bulb and the green stem. Peel off the outermost layer if you haven't already while it was cooking, and chop just above the roots, giving us this nice pearl onion. So we're just going to go through these as quickly as we can, being careful not to cut ourselves. Now, the stem of the wild onion is still edible, so you can eat that. We're not going to add it into our quiche today, but if you wanted to put that into a salad or on top of something like fish, you could chop it like chives, put it on a baked potato. But I think we're just either going to give this to T-bone or the pigs. I would give it to the goats, but the flavor of the onion will get into their milk. So if Miss Lydia is still using the milk from the goats, I don't want to spoil it with the onions. All right, so they're all done. So we can take the last of these greens and just bring them on over to the pigs in a little bit. Scooch those to the back. So we have our onions here, and they're a little big. So I'm going to want to chop these up a little more before we continue cooking them. That way you don't just get a whole hunk of onion in your bite of quiche. Just want to cut them lengthwise, and then again lengthwise, and that ought to be good. So we're just going to cut them into fourths. Alrighty. So with these all diced up, we're now going to throw them into a pan with a little bit of butter, and we are going to cook them on our stove That way they get a little softer and it brings out more of their sweet flavor rather than being more of that raw onion flavor when they go into the quiche. Alright, so the power's back on. We have our onions cooking. Luckily, we are done with our stove, because if we come over here, well, there is that one still in there. We're going to let the residual heat kind of cook that up a little longer. Our other pie crust is nice and golden brown. You might have wanted to take it out a little before this, but I wasn't paying attention. Still looking good though. It might get a little too brown along the crust, so we might go ahead and brush that with a little water as the quiche is cooking, and that should help to slow the process down so it doesn't burn instead of just get golden brown. Come back over here. There we go. So our onions are starting to take on a very nice color to them. Getting more translucent and caramelized. Oh, and they smell great. So I think we're probably good to turn off our pan and just let these sit. And we're going to move on to our next step, which is to make our quiche base. Now that's going to be eggs, butter, and milk. So instead of milk today, I'm using heavy whipping cream because it's something I've always wanted to try. So we're going to move on to our next step, which is to add 2 cups of heavy whipping cream into our bowl. I tried to make whipped cream out of it. It was not happening. So if it doesn't work, ignore it. You can also use milk or just your regular cream. And to this, we are also going to add some of our seasoning. So we're going to add, I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm going to add a bit of salt. And just a bit of black pepper. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some of our eggs from here at the farm and we're going to crack them right into there. So we're going to crack about 6 eggs into our mix before we decide whether or not we needed more. 1, 2, 3, something, another number, and 6. We're going to do more. That's definitely, we're just going to do all the ones we have gathered. Be careful not to get your shells in there. So if you're doing 2 whole quiches, you're probably going to need the equivalent of a dozen eggs. So that's only maybe a dozen now. Some of them are smaller, so I think we're going to have to add a few more. So we're going to go have to look for them in the coop and come back. So now that we have our milk and egg mixture all frothed up and ready, we are going to start to add our wild edibles. So we are going to put in all of our poor man's pepper. There we are. As well as our onions. These kind of crisped up a whole lot while they were cooking. So this is actually going to be really, really good. Now, I had said you wanted them softer, more translucent, because you didn't want the raw onion flavor. But there's a whole load of difference between a crispy onion from being cooked and a crispy onion from not being cooked. And this one is the good kind. So we're going to wait on our garlic mustard, however, so we're just going to mix these in to our mixture and then go pour them into our pie crusts. So now we have our pie crusts ready. We are just going to pour in our mixture to 1, and we're going to close the door here so we can pour our mixture into number 2, and then we're going to pour a little more into 1, and a little more into 2, a little more into 1. Yeah, it's looking good. All right, and now to finish us off, we are going to add our garlic mustard, and we're just going to layer this on top. So we're going to set aside our larger leaves, and start layering our smaller ones on there. Just going to put them right on top. Alrighty, so now that we have our garlic mustard on top, we are ready to go. So we are going to put these in the oven. It's preheated to 375. As it turns out, using the whipped cream actually has given it a lot of solidity. So you're going to just very carefully place them in. Still a bit liquid, so be gentle. And we're going to let these cook until we can stick a knife in them. So the battery on my nice camera died, so we're going to do this from my phone. But as I was saying, now that our quiche is all prepped up, we're going to let this cook in the oven until you can stick a knife into the center and pull it out without anything coming off. So I'm going to go ahead and give it probably 15-20 minutes and come back to check it periodically. I'm not entirely sure how long it's going to take because using the heavy whipping cream might alter its cook time. However, it did end up working. I didn't get it into a full whipped cream, but it did add a lot of nice airiness into the quiche, so I think it's still going to be very tasty. So our crust was cooking a little too fast and the filling wasn't cooking quite fast enough. So I've dropped our temperature down to 350 and I gave it another 7 minutes. And we're going to let it cook a little lower and a little longer. That way the crust doesn't get too burned. I've brushed the bottom quiche with a bit of water around its crust to help keep it from burning faster. And I have swapped the top and bottom quiches, that way they can cook a little more evenly. So the top one doesn't have as much filling, so it should cook a little faster. So we're gonna give it that other 7 minutes and see how it goes. And while we're waiting on that, we're gonna do the most important part of this entire exercise, and that is to disinfect everything in the shared cooking space here at the farm. So I've got a paper towel and some cleanser, and we're just gonna do that while we wait. So I got to weed whacking and lost track of time and accidentally left our other quiche in the oven for an extra 8 minutes over the 10 I was originally going to leave it for. So our final quiche probably cooked for roughly 40 to 45 minutes. Sticking a knife in it comes out nice and clean, so it is good to go. And since it was more filled, I'm going to come down low. You can actually see it's puffed up quite a bit compared to the other one. So I'm kind of excited to open it up and see what it looks like inside. So our wild edible quiche is complete. It is delicious. The combination between the wild onions, the garlic mustard, and the poor man's pepper all work rather well together. And you can see it even has those air pockets from the heavy whipping cream. So if you like a lighter quiche, that's a good way to get it. Now, it did take a lot longer to cook than our other one, but this is just as delicious, and I am looking forward to cracking into it. If you make your own quiches at home, share a pic with us, share your experience. We'd love to hear how it goes. And if you enjoyed this little lesson on wild edible plants, let us know, because hopefully we'll do more of them, just like we did with the dandelion fritters.